you work in the lab with Carol Dweck, and she, had her book called Mindset, and then something became confusing with that word at some point and conveying it. And I think that's why I kind of took a step back for a second. So maybe you can clarify that for everybody and then say, like, what is this ordinary magic? Where does that word come from? And what are we talking about here when it comes to just people's everyday anxiety?
So the reason I have hesitancy about the word mindset is because I've heard too many Stanford students say things like, I was told in high school I should have a growth mindset, as though it was all on them and it was like they could willfully choose to have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, that it had nothing to do with the people around them or the experiences they were having. And that's always felt inauthentic to me. Like, you can't just, even if you think a growth mindset would be better to have, you can't just believe it. Like, just believe like that. It doesn't work, for me at least.
Have you ever had that moment, maybe it was in a relationship, at work, or in school, where something small happens and suddenly you spiral? You get flooded with self doubt, you wonder if you really belong, and you start telling yourself a story, and it's not a helpful one. Well, what if that moment, that downward spiral, could be interrupted and even reversed by something small? Something that seems ordinary, but actually changes everything. Today on the Emotional Longevity Podcast, I'm talking with Dr. Greg Walton, Stanford psychologist, co founder of the Wise Interventions Movement, and author of the brilliant new book, Ordinary Magic. His work has changed how we understand belonging, self doubt, and what really drives lasting change in people's lives. We're going to unpack why moments of struggle don't mean something is wrong with you, and how to shift out of that downward spiral by naming the hidden questions behind your stress, the psychology of belonging and what makes us feel truly seen and also what doesn't, and some of the most surprising scientific findings that show how small actions create massive impact. He is full of stories, incredible knowledge about the research, his own research. This interview with Greg is a masterclass in how to help people spiral up, not down. So, whether you're a parent, a leader, or just someone who wants to feel less stuck in your own head, this conversation is for you. Okay, let's not wait any longer. Here we go. Greg Walton, welcome to the Emotional Longevity Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I mentioned to you in a conversation before we got on that, when I first came across your book, Ordinary Magic, that it really struck a chord with me because, part of what I do and what's fascinating to me is how do we meet these moments in our everyday lives? And life itself is already overwhelming enough. And if we can kind of show ourselves and other people that we can make the big changes in small acts that we do, or shifts in our mindset, well, we'll talk about that in a second, the word mindset, but then that can really be supportive for a whole lot of us. In the beginning of the book, you open up, and one of the first chapters in your book is you start by talking about these spirals. And you mentioned your very first spiral, I think was, you said you were 4 years old or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And talk to us about that, because I think that's something that we all experience, and you start to give us ways to begin to shift that.
Yeah, so I'll tell that story first because I think it does start to illustrate. So I was a little 4-year-old boy who had a ton of energy and not a lot of friends because my family had moved temporarily from Michigan to California. And I was in this preschool. And the preschool was run, as my parents later said, by an LA businesswoman who didn't understand children. And it was called Thistleberry. I still remember that name. And they had a rule that you couldn't run, even outside. And I had a lot of energy and I had no friends, and all of a sudden all the kids are like going off in some direction, so I'd run after them, and I ended every day getting in trouble, and I would be put in timeout, and I'd be sitting in the bleachers, and I would sit there and I would stew in my own juices, and I'd get more and more angry, and I would feel the injustice of this and the badness that was this school. And then I started to feel this moral obligation to not let other future children suffer this that I had suffered. And I began to follow the director around as she showed the school to new prospective parents and tell those parents exactly what I thought. And that got me kicked out. So the director hauled me in, hauled my parents in, and said, "We'll tell the other parents whatever you like, but he's not welcome back here." So that's a spiral. It's a downward spiral, and it's got a kind of element of psychology, like it's got my own feelings, but then those feelings get manifest in behavior, and that behavior kind of exacerbates the problem in the end. It ultimately exits me from the situation, although maybe that was a good thing.
Say more about that. Say more about how the behavior exits you.
Well, I mean, I decided they were my enemy, right? Like, like you can think about that. Like, you can think about other kinds of school settings. You can think about work settings. You can think about interactions with neighbors, and you can certainly think about interactions across political divides, where you go from a disagreement to deciding that someone's your enemy, and then they're your enemy. You're going to go out and try to destroy them. That was me at the age of 4.
Yeah. Natural for a 4-year-old to be not natural for a 4-year-old or a 40-year-old to
Yeah.
be thinking in that way. Yeah.
I mean, I kind of think that the psychology that a 4-year-old has is also present in all of the 40-year-olds in the world. It's just that you also have other psychologies too, um, and and you can kind of express that. And when you feel that excluded and that isolated or that marginalized or that unseen or unheard, that's when people will do things that are can be really destructive even to themselves.
Yeah, one of the core things you bring up early on is something that we all experience and has been shown to be a core, I don't know, Achilles heel in our culture is a sense of belonging.
Hmm.
And you lay it out that here's one of our you lay a few things out, but this is one of our core needs that does get threatened, and you're just speaking to it right now. Can you speak a little bit to what the nature of that is in our culture right now, and how that fits along with what you're talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, there's tons of kind of belonging dynamics that are happening in the culture. Who's a real American? Who really belongs in this country? What is it that we owe each other? I think you see this in debates around things like selective colleges and universities and affirmative action programs, and you certainly see it in debates around things like immigration and who really belongs in the country. And there are whole communities of people, lots of communities of people, maybe most people in America who feel that they have been neglected, unseen, unheard, unsupported, pain unnoticed, their realities unacknowledged. You can think about conflicts like the war in Gaza and the competing narratives about that from that perspective as well.
Where one of the examples you given here is this example of, let's say, a junior staffer coming in and they're late to a Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
You have so much in this book that it's like I know as and sometimes being interviewed, it's hard to remember like all the different stories that are actually in it. But so here you have, and you have this thing where you're like, this person's late, and we all make these missteps, and we start getting really self critical in our minds, and we start worrying. Someone makes a joke, someone makes a snicker, somebody sends a text, and you wonder, do I belong
Yeah.
here? And it's a
Yeah,
threat.
so yeah, let's break this down a little bit because I think it's the details matter, and the details are why small things can end up mattering a lot. So in the story in the book, it compares the exact same event that happens if you're a senior member of the team, you've been on the team for a long time, you're maybe higher in the hierarchy. Maybe then what happens is that you're late, something messes up your morning, there's a Zoom meeting, you're 10 minutes late to the meeting, you join the call, and somebody makes a joke, someone makes a comment. And because you're not worried about your belonging, you're a senior member of the team, you laugh and you keep going with the meeting and you're focused on the problem at hand and you're, building out whatever the work it is. But if you're a new member of the team, you just joined the team, you're junior on the hierarchy, not quite sure yet of your fit in that place, of how people receive you or see you, or if they value you or if you can contribute. You're 15 minutes late or just 10 minutes late to the meeting. Somebody makes the same joke, and it could feel like it's confirming this fear that you have. And if that's the experience, then that can preoccupy you and it can distract you and it might be hard to focus. And you might be tempted to lash out like I did when I was 4 at the preschool. It might tempt you to withdraw, to hold back is another kind of response. And if you do those kinds of things, if you have that thought and then you do those kinds of things, that can produce its consequence, right? Then you actually are not contributing to the team. You actually are kind of disrupting the team dynamics, and that might end your employment at that place.
Yeah, and I imagine that for me, when I think about this, I think of that then as it preoccupies you, you're not able to really focus on what matters.
Right.
You start maybe thinking there's conflict in areas there may not be conflict in certain relationships, so you may start avoiding certain people or feeling more insecure around them, that again shifts your ability to be what people might think of as your optimal performance. Let's say at the workplace, as an example.
Yeah, I like the word trap, right? I think it traps you a little bit, and you're not free then. And the shifts that we talk about when we understand this dynamic that can let a person release that, they free us. They free us to be able to, for example, focus on the problem at hand and do our work and build the relationships in that space.
Let's say you're somebody who is feeling anxious and you are preoccupied. You're worrying about something. You do find yourself in what you call a spiral and an emotional spiral. And you know what? When you talk about these shifts, this sort of ordinary magic, let's say, which I love that term, give us some really tangible examples on what you mean by that. And I guess I'll preclude this. And the reason in the beginning when we first started talking, I like kind of mentioned the word mindset, and I said we'll talk about that. Is that you work in the lab with Carol Dweck, and she had her book called Mindset, and then something became confusing with that word at some point and conveying it. And I think that's why I kind of took a step back for a second. So maybe you can clarify that for everybody, and then say, like, what is this ordinary magic? Where does that word come from? And what are we talking about here when it comes to just people's
Yeah.
everyday anxiety?
So yeah, so the reason I have hesitancy about the word mindset is because I've heard too many Stanford students say things like, I was told in high school I should have a growth mindset, as though it was all on them and it was like they could willfully choose to have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, that it had nothing to do with the people around them or the experiences they were having. And that's always felt inauthentic to me. Like, you can't just, even if you think a growth mindset would be better to have, you can't just believe it. Like, just believe like that. It doesn't work for me, at least. Instead, it's the dynamic that I think is more helpful to talk about is a dynamic of thinking about the psychological circumstance that you're in and the question that that circumstance poses to you, and to be able to see that really clearly, and then to be able to decide how do you want to answer that question that's often implicit in the situation. So if you're experiencing a lot of self-doubt, if you're worried, for example, about your abilities or whether people like you or whether you're good enough, it's helpful to be able to say, yeah, these are the questions that I'm asking. This is the question that's on the table for me. And it's helpful to be able to say, where is it that that question is coming from? And almost always, that question is coming very reasonably from the situation that you are in, from outside of you. It's not it's not like you're disordered or there's something screwed up about you or you're irrational in some way. It's like literally coming from the complexity of the world that we live in and something that's in that world, or maybe how you've experienced that world in the past. So, for example, like you might be like, let's stay with fixed and growth mindsets of intelligence. You might take a test, maybe a standardized test, and you don't do very well on that test. Like, you do worse than you were hoping, and someone is surprised at how you did, and they're like looking at you a little dubiously, and you feel like a shiver of ickiness go through you. Like, where is that coming from? It's coming from a world that has literally taught people that some people are smart and other people are dumb, that if you're smart you're going to be able to succeed in life and you're worthy, and if you're dumb you're not going to be able to succeed in life and you're not worthy, and that standardized tests can somehow magically figure out whether you're smart or dumb. And so when you have that test, that reaction to a failed test, you don't automatically think, oh, like I didn't get it, or oh, there's something I need to do to like learn this better, or maybe I need to take a different approach, or maybe somebody else who did well could help me figure out a better way to study for this. You don't think about those pragmatic things that would be actually productive. You just have this thought like, maybe I'm not worthy, like maybe I'm not adequate,
Yeah,
and it's
or
coming.
maybe I don't belong.
And maybe I don't belong. Like, I'm trying to get into a school, for example, and I got an SAT score, for example, that's really low for that school. Maybe I don't belong in that school. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I'm not worthy, you know?
Oh yeah, I remember the first time I was looking at my a friend in fourth grade. We're in class together, and we were told to sit and draw. And I looked over at him, and he looked like he was drawing something that I could recognize. I looked at mine, and it wasn't something that I could really recognize. And so I'm like, huh, I guess, yeah, I guess I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And that came pretty quickly.
Yeah. And we have, and that thought is your experience of these ideas that exist in the culture that have been literally like taught to people.
And maybe also in your family
Yeah, in your
growing
family.
up.
I mean, in fixed and growth mindset work, for example, there's a lot of work on how routine practices of praise among parents can facilitate different ways of thinking among kids. There's work on how a former graduate student of ours named Kyla Hamovitz has this lovely work showing that how growth mindset oriented parents can produce fixed mindset oriented kids. And the reason is because the parents' belief about growth and fixed mindset is not actually that visible to kids. What is visible to kids is how parents react to mistakes. And parents who you can have a growth mindset, but still have a kind of catastrophic reaction to a mistake. So if a kid makes a mistake on something, and a parent who generally has a growth mindset has a kind of catastrophic reaction to that mistake, the kid essentially infers that maybe the parent has a fixed mindset. Maybe you either have it or you don't. And then they start to develop a fixed mindset for themselves. So these ideas can get transmitted even when that's not what the parent actually believes. But the way that it's actually working is that it's essentially that reaction on the parent is then provoking for the kid the question, maybe I don't have what it takes. Maybe I'm not good enough.
When was the moment for you when, I mean, you in here you talk about like things like wise interventions and how to mediate these moments in a variety of ways and in some in small acts. When was the moment for you where something really clicked for you, where you saw like what you talk about in here, where you saw that ordinary magic really happening in your life, and it was, this became a part of your personal story?
Yeah, let me hold on one sec. So this is just one kind of example. This is from my bookshelf right over there. Can you see it here? Is it visible? I can't hear you there.
Does it say the two sexes?
Yes. So this is a book. So I was given this book when I was a sophomore in college. I had taken a class. This is by Eleanor Maccabee, and she was one of the first women to be really prominent in academic psychology. And she was already retired when I took this class from her as a sophomore in college. But she had written this book and it was in its proofs form. So there was kind of the purpose of the seminar class was to go through the book and talk about the book and give her final feedback before it was published here. And then she gave me a copy of this book and she wrote a little inscription on the inside. And it says, "For Greg, who does think like a psychologist and may become one, Eleanor Maccabee." And like to a young person, like to, I was probably 19 years old when I got this, to have someone like Eleanor Maccabee say, I mean, it's life defining big, right? Big is too small of a word, right? So when you have someone who's not there yet, who's struggling, maybe they're getting in conflicts a lot, who's worried about whether who they could become, and then somebody can credibly say, here's who I see who you can become, that can completely change a person's life. And I think that's the most powerful thing that a teacher can do.
It's interesting that you say that because, I think about in my life how there's been a certain cadence and message. I'll say, as an example, my dad has been has been sending in all of his cards, birthday cards, things like that, and it's filtrated through the rest of us kids, which is this idea. And I think a lot of kids get this, but the repetition of it and the meaning behind it of it, you really just need to believe in yourself. If you can believe in yourself, all the world is possible. And so this idea of like really believing in yourself became something that integrated into me, and at least as a thread. Don't get me wrong, I have a ton of self-doubt, and I know where that comes from too, but there's something about that, someone you're looking up to who says something to you like that, and yours is a huge example that can make a huge impact. And that's what, one of the things that you kind of talk about is ordinary magic.
Yes, it is. With the language like believe in yourself, it goes back a little bit to my challenge with have a growth mindset, right?
You did say that, right?
Yeah, if you're not believing in yourself, if you're feeling crummy, then having somebody just assert believe in yourself, like it's easy to think, well, I wish I did, but I don't, right? And so I think often this work is work that we do together. It's work that we do in tandem. And so when somebody says, I believe in you, and here's why I believe in you, and here's how I believe in you, despite the fact that I see like how screwed up things are right now, then that becomes really helpful and powerful. That's a way in which we can ratchet each other up.
Yeah, I could see the difference in that. Um, it's a shift in implicit bias for a second when you get that from someone you're looking up to. Like it's a shortcut in some way where you automatically kind of shifts the way that you open up and implicitly see something, see what's possible. Maybe tell us a little bit, just kind of back. Where did this term, say a little bit more, where ordinary magic came from, and then let's talk a little about wise interventions to could ground it.
Yeah, I mean, so, well, let me just start with wise interventions and we can come back to it. But, you know, in the psychological literature, that's the word we use, but people don't really know what we mean by wise or by intervention. So that was never a candidate for the title of the book. There was a period in the writing of the book where we had a working title of spiral up, but that didn't have the. I love the juxtaposition of ordinary and magic against each other, and it really has been my experience as a researcher, that is to construct a study in which you're trying to offer people a helpful way to think about something that might be really hard and challenging, and then to see their lives unfold in different ways, like because they had this experience for half an hour or 45 minutes at one point, and then they have a different trajectory of their lives. It's like both ordinary and it's magical, and I wanted to kind of honor both of those aspects of it, both of those ways of seeing it. And it's really an effort to, you know, on one hand, to kind of see the magic and the ordinary things that we already do for each other, to see the magicness of that. And it's also an effort to try to do that more. Like if it's ordinary, it's available to us, it's accessible to us. It's not a huge lift to be able to accomplish it, to accomplish the kind of, you know, big changes that we need to see.
Right, we can. It's already here. It's just
It,
in the way we're using our everyday lives
yeah.
in some
And we
way.
all
Yeah.
do it all the time. You know, one of the examples, one of the really like simple kind of placebo examples from the book is from the Robert McCloskey picture book, One Morning in Maine. I think it's kind of so simple, it's so elegant. So one morning in Maine, Sal, a young girl, begins the story by saying, "Mama, Mama, my tooth is loose and I'm not going to be able to go to Bucks Harbor with my father." And so she has this crisis that she's not going to be able to have the good day that she wants because her tooth is loose. But her mother kind of executes the wise intervention. She says, "Sal, when you have a loose tooth, that's when you become a big girl." And the whole first two-thirds of the book, essentially, is Sal playing with this idea, this way of thinking about this experience of hers. And it's just the same, like you know, you take a standardized test and you don't get a good grade, and you think, you know, "Mama, Mama, I'm not going to be able to go to college and have the, you know, become a doctor and have achieve my dreams." And it's like, no, you know, that first test might be the first part of your learning journey. And how do we really execute that? How do we really do that with each other? That's the
You know, Greg, that's really helpful to me as my kids are, and my oldest kid is 16, and he's starting to take some of these standardized APA tests and things like that. And now, so whatever comes back,
yeah.
I'm gonna be able to help me out with
Well,
that.
you know, we had a collaboration with College Board around their AP program. This is research is not yet published, but we were looking at kids who'd taken a first AP test and then they got a two. So in the AP system, a two is like
Oh yeah,
it's not a one, which is like the worst mark, but it's not a three where you begin to get college credit.
right.
And we were working with them to communicate to students a kind of not yet message. Like, look at this is college level work, and look at the progress you've made. You haven't achieved this yet, but this we're impressed with your progress. And that seems to improve people's reaction and willingness to take on future academic challenges. So that kind of not yet language.
I liked the way that you said it before too, like the whole mama thing, which was like, this is the beginning of your learning journey. Your learning journey goes, it's in high school, it goes through college, and believe me, it doesn't end. It's after that. You got a whole work thing there. So this is just the beginning. This is stepping stones across what really matters here, not that 3 or 4. Of course, it's nice to get college credit, but what you're learning from this and gain from it, that's the real magic there.
Absolutely. And the only reason why we don't automatically have that way of understanding is because this is the way that standardized tests have been pitched to us, as diagnostic of you and your merit and your deservingness and your entire being. And you wonder why people feel inadequate then.
Yeah. Oh well, it's all over. So whenever anyone
Yeah.
ever asks me like, where does this sense of not belonging come from? I'm like, well, I live in Los Angeles, and so like every billboard everywhere, all over the place. I mean, is always sharing with you. Well, now with the internet, I guess, and social media for a long time, there's always been I'm not quite where I need to be. So there's a deficiency gap that keeps getting fed over and over again implicitly. Not to mention what might come from growing up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
I think it's really
speaking
fun.
of LA, can I just
Yeah.
appreciate the Barbie movie, right? Like
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
the theme of like I'm not enough,
Yeah.
right?
That was a
I
great
love it.
movie. Yeah. Well, give us some more like of these wise interventions. Let's kind of fill this out a little bit because if people can help kind of grasp this and begin to make use of it in their lives. I mean, it's really the word magic. I like the way you explain ordinary magic because it really is like, whoa, I can make this. It's almost an embodied shift because it's implicit, just in the way I'm kind of doing this. Is there anything else involved with that?
Well, it's implicit, but it's also explicit, right? Like a lot of these intervention, like in One Morning in Maine, Saul's mother is very explicit. This is what it means, right? So there's like a way, often the doubts that we have are implicit. And then we can kind of, when we're in the right state and in the right interaction, we can kind of use our prefrontal cortexes individually and together to say, like, okay, how do we want to think about that? What would be a useful way to think about that? So one kind of context that obviously we haven't talked about this kind of context yet, but one kind of context that obviously provokes a lot of doubt for people is relationship context and feeling unworthy in a relationship, feeling like maybe your partner doesn't really love
Uh,
you.
That's huge.
Yeah, right. And of course that comes to a head when you have conflict, right? When there's a disagreement, when somebody's feeling underappreciated or disrespected or bad. So there's a beautiful study led by a woman named Denise Marigold, who's a researcher in Canada, and she brought couples in to have a conversation. This was just a lab study. There's no longitudinal outcome, but I think it's very powerful. And what she did before the couples had a conversation, it's going to be a conversation about the most significant conflict in their relationship. Is she has each member of the couple by themselves think about a recent compliment that their partner had given them, to think about that compliment, and then to think about how it reflects something true and deep and enduring about their partner's regard for them. And the basic idea is that you want both people to feel assured of their partner's love, like to feel confident of that, to feel that love right then. And then you're going to go have this conversation about a conflict in your relationship. And what's going to, maybe you'll be able to have that conversation better. And that's what she shows. So she shows that when couples are able to have that space first to reflect on that compliment, the conversations themselves, they're pragmatic, there's humor in them, there's affection in them, there's love in them, there's less snipiness, there's not contempt or hostility anymore. There's no like passive aggressive BS, right? People are actually able to say, okay, like what's the issue we face as a couple, and how can we solve that issue? How can we work together to make that work for both of us? And that like the inference from that work is that the kind of latent anxiety about love, about whether your partner truly regards you and appreciates you and loves you, is what's contributing to the kind of toxic dynamic in conflict conversations. Like if you and I are in a relationship and you're mad because I'm late all the time, and ostensibly we're having an argument about me being late all the time, really under the surface, we're having an argument about whether or not I love you and you love me. And if that's really what we're fighting about, we can't really solve the problem of the lateness, right? But if we can get that issue addressed, if we can address that issue, then we can solve the actual pragmatic problem at hand, and then we're in a better state.
I see. It's about really kind of setting the foundation. And you said that in a moment in the very end you said we're in a better state. So does some of this have to do with because that what that strikes me that intervention does is you said it deeper. It addresses really the underlying issue. Do you love me or I love you? Are we feeling loved and cared about? But it also creates a different state of
Mm-hmm.
mind in doing that, which other research has shown that when you're in a more positive state, you tend to be more resilient and open.
Mm-hmm.
And that tends to bring that positive state to mind, which
Mhm.
you're saying facilitates communication and leads to a better outcome in the relationship.
Yeah, so like often when we experience doubts, like doubt in a partner's love or doubt in your abilities or feelings of inadequacy, like these are icky feelings. Nobody wants to feel that. So what do? We like push it down, we suppress it. But that's not dealing with it. It's not contending with it. It's not an authentic way to understand that thing that lets you set it aside. So then it sits beneath you, kind of like a volcano that you put a little thin cap on, and it spouts up all the time and produces, dysfunction and problem like in a conflict conversation with a partner.
Hey everyone, we're going to take a quick break to check in and talk about a program that's very important to me. I've been working with people for over 20 years, and in that time, what I've realized is that uncovering emotional healing, strengthening emotional health, and building resilience works best when we're learning practical skills that are evidence based, supported by a caring community, and have access to daily guidance and support. That's why I built my emotional health coaching program. If you're someone who's ready to take your emotional health to the next level, you're tired of yo yoing around, you want to start really making real progress, whether it's building resilience, managing stress better, or simply feeling more balanced, you can get a free consult for the program. Just click the link in the description below to schedule your session and learn how we can support you. Now, let's get back to the episode. Yeah. What it's so even in being able to communicate that feeling that's there. Like, for example, I'm noticing we're in a relationship. I'm noticing we've been fairly disconnected lately, and I'm really wanting to share something with you. And, but I know it's kind of hard for me to do. To have that awareness and be able to do that, you're saying there are things we can do that can actually make that maybe even easier to facilitate the connection. And is there any other research that some of your favorite you have a lot of research in this book, and so are there other, and you've done a lot of your own research, what is some of your favorite research that speaks to this,
Speaks to which particularly you're thinking about.
that speaks to these shifts,
Yeah.
that give us a sense of belonging, connection, put us in a.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about this work by Kiara Sanchez on conversations between friends. So to stay in the relationship space, but it's not a romantic relationship. So Kiara is a professor at Dartmouth now, and she's from Laredo, Texas originally, and she went to Rice University. And as a Mexican American in Laredo, she was in the majority. Like everybody's Mexican American in Laredo. It's like 99% Hispanic. And then she goes to Rice and she suddenly discovers that she's a minority. And she has these kinds of awkward conversations with her new friends, many of them white, about her Mexican identity and experience. And she's like bothered by that and puzzled by that and tries to work that out. And she then learns about research on cross race friendships, which shows that on the one hand, they're really important. Like it's really important that people are able to make friends with people from different groups. That's like part of having a functioning democratic civil society. And on the other hand, they are unstable, like they decline in closeness over time more quickly than same race friendships. And she starts to think that maybe this has to do with how people contend with or don't contend with difference in these relationships. Like if a person of color, for example, feels like race is a no go zone, then they can't really share that whole aspect of their experience and identity with a white friend. And then they don't feel seen. They don't feel understood by that white friend. And it becomes a block in the relationship. But Kiara is also thinking about the way that those kinds of conversations, like conversations about difference in general and conversations about race in particular, can be they can be difficult. They can make people feel anxious. You can feel like you're going to say the wrong thing. You can feel like you're going to be judged, not understood. And so, what she does in this study is she has black and white friends, young adults, come together and have a conversation. And there's three conditions. In the first condition, they just talk about a personal experience from the black friend's life. In the second condition, they talk about an experience that's related to their race. And in the third condition, she gives both friends a kind of tool to manage and contend with the anxiety that can come up in that conversation. So she gives them a short exercise that she calls a friendship affirming appraisal of anxiety in a race related conversation. So people think about how anxiety can come up in these conversations, how that can reflect friends' commitment to each other, how that can be an opportunity for learning and growth, and how that can get better with time. They read some stories from other friends, from racially diverse friends who talk about that, and they reflect on that for themselves. And then what Kiara does is she looks at how the conversations go, but she also tracks those friendships as far as 2 to 8 months into the future. And
Wow.
what she finds is that into the future, in that third condition, Black friends are able to maintain their sense of closeness with their white friend. They're able to feel more authentic with their white friend, and they're able to feel more comfortable talking about race with their white friend. Whereas in the first two conditions, they both declined. So that sense of I'm feeling kind of anxious here, and that might be a problem. That might be a bad thing. It might say something bad about me or my friendship. That's getting in the way of friends being able to actually talk about difference in a real way, in a way that's authentic, and in a way that maintains the relationship going forward.
So the intervention was these friendship affirming things, which to me, what that does is that creates a sense of trust, or reminds a sense of trust, or puts a reminder of that, or a feeling of it in the air, which helps us feel safe to be able to be vulnerable and disclose.
Yeah, I think it's both about me as a person being able to understand my anxiety in a better way, and also about me as a person being able to understand my friend's anxiety in a better way. Like we both might be kind of anxious in this conversation, and that's okay. Like we don't, and the conversation doesn't have to be perfect. Like if there's something, a little misstep or disconnection or lack of understanding between us in the conversation, that's okay. It's a kind of growth mindset applied to the friendship and being able to talk about a subject like race between friends.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and you can obviously you can think about that, like what does that dynamic look like in other kinds of conversations across lines of difference of age or gender or sexuality, national origin, whatever you might, political divides, right?
I just think of an everyday relationship. I think like over time, there's these differences that people grow into, especially in like like even some long standing relationships, and there's a divide there because there's a fear of rejection or not belonging, or and these types of things that you're talking about. These that in the marriage example that you gave earlier in that study, even in this a friendship affirming type of example, these are small things, and just to use your language, these are small things you can do that
Mm-hmm.
science is showing you that can really make a difference in we're in the context of relationships right now, but I think a lot of that matters to a lot of people, and to make a change.
Yeah,
And it yeah.
yeah. And it's available to you. Like it's available to all of us. And one of my big goals in writing Ordinary Magic was to share back with a much broader community what my professional community has learned, often from working with people in specific situations, specific difficult situations, and the wisdom that people have learned about how to navigate those situations effectively. So my community has then often taken those insights and tried to systematize them and do science on them so we can understand systematically what the consequences of these practices are. And now that we've done that, we can share that back and we can hopefully all spiral up.
Right. And we need that support we need the insights that you're bringing, and we need that to be reminded, because our culture or the environments that we're in don't necessarily remind us of that.
No, they don't. And in a lot of ways, they directly counter it. So we talked about the kind of history of fixed mindset thinking and the ways that standardized tests were born. It's evident in things like gifted and talented programs and praise practices. You're so smart, and parents' global reactions to mistakes on the part of kids that feed that kind of culture. It's also present in clinical psychology, right? We have a clinical psychology system that is predicated on the diagnostic interview. So like, you're feeling something and you go in to your your clinical psychologist and you get a clinical interview that diagnoses ostensibly like what is distinctly wrong with you, and you have to do that in order to get services. You have to be told there's something wrong with you in order to get
Mm.
services, when the whole point is that you feel like there might be something wrong with you. Like this is sort of starting on the back foot.
It's interesting with that one, because you're absolutely right. And at the same time, sometimes people feel a great release when they're able to name and label something. And there's a
Absolutely.
sense of belonging in that too.
Yes. So what can so I mean, I think the reason for that is because you can feel like somebody else has experienced what I'm experiencing. I'm not the only one who's experienced. But better, far better yet, would be to understand what you're experiencing as really like coming from the world and the context that you're in, and coming into who you are as a person experiencing that world, not as something that's distinctly wrong with you, or you as being irrational or abnormal in some way. Even if you're abnormal with other abnormal people, that's still a problematic representation. In the book, I tell the story of a conversation with a Stanford undergraduate who was, we were both at the Stanford program in Berlin, and we were having the first kind of welcome dinner. And I was sitting beside her, and so I was just asking her about her life. I'd never met her before, and she says, I was a really competitive gymnast in high school, and then I blew my knee out, and then COVID happened, and I couldn't see my friends. And she was very clear, like very direct and clear in describing the circumstance to me. So clear that I could very clearly think what I thought would be the consequence if one were to experience that. So I just said to her, "Did that make you depressed?" And she said, "Absolutely. I was already seeing a therapist, but for sure." And like that's a conversation in which the two of us were ratcheting each other up. Like she was giving me this description of her circumstance. I was saying, like, you're 18 years old, you can't do what you love, and now you can't see your friends. Like, would that make a person depressed? It would, it could make a person depressed. Like,
Right.
it's not about her. It's not like there's something wrong with her. There's something wrong with being 18 and not being able to do those things. Right. And then she was affirming my representation. So in that conversation, we were agreeing essentially, we had common ground that there was nothing wrong with her and I wasn't judging her. But that was a situation. It was a difficult situation.
Yeah. Does this one of the questions you name a few questions in your book that you say we all think about? Can I do it? Do I belong? Am I enough? These are when I read those, I'm like, yeah, those are fairly classic and universal. I experienced them in my own life in a variety of different ways. This "can I do it" one, I kind of want to go through these a little bit because I think a lot of people, like it goes back to my dad. There was that sense of like, I believe in you.
Mm-hmm.
It, and you got that in the inscription of the book. But can I do it? Like, give us like where you think the state of that is in our culture right now, and how you speak to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think people often go through schooling and they think of each kind of step, each kind of milestone as a barometer of whether or not they can do it, whether or not they can, become who they want to be. So that's true like in early standardized testing, and then it's true all the way through. Like you could imagine, I remember my freshman year of college, I wasn't pre-med ever, but a lot of people were pre-med. And I remember one student in my dorm who was taking the introductory chemistry class, and she was pre-med. She wanted to become a doctor, and apparently she hadn't done very well on the first midterm. And I just remember her like epic distress at that, because it feels like if you fail, first midterm of chemistry, that your entire dream of becoming a doctor is on the line. And so we really need like a deep growth mindset there. Like we need to understand that different people are going to approach a given class like that with different kinds of backgrounds. Different things come easier or harder to different people. And we need to like be able to track the true kind of progress of growth that a person can have, to really lean into the word yet, like maybe you don't get it yet, and find that trajectory towards the goals that you have, that you dream of.
What's the to me in my life, one of the things that's helped me around that has been other people. Like you speak
Mm-hmm.
to, we need these different messages being
Mm-hmm.
sent to the kids with that. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of research on the tiny things that matter in these circumstances. So there's at the at State University of New York, Buffalo, Laura Park did this little study with math, where she just manipulated what, so students had done well on a P set, a problem set, and she just manipulated whether or not the professor wrote "good job" on the top of it. And that landed, for particularly for women who of course are underrepresented in math and math related fields. They felt more confident going forward. They felt more efficacious going forward in math. And then the a converse of that is a team at UC Davis, University of California Davis. Scott Krell, an economics professor, and McCall Kurlander, a higher education scholar, they looked at circumstances where people had done badly on a first assignment, like a first midterm, and they manipulated whether people got a simple email from their professor saying, "Hey, I noticed you didn't do that well on the first midterm. There's lots of time left in the class. Here are some of the resources we have to support you. Like, let me know how we can help you." And that made everybody experience the class better. And for certain groups of students, it actually raised their grades and their persistence in the university. Right. So, like, there's these key moments where people feel like their trajectories are on the line and they're trying to suss out, like, is this a direction I can go in? Is this a path, or am I not enough? And messages from important people like teachers in those environments can make a big difference.
The what that brings up, the response in that study was like the definition of compassion, which is the recognition of someone else's struggle with the inclination to want to support them. Hey, how can we
Right.
support you? It's the same thing that's taught in parenting. Like your kid's struggling, it's like, okay, I notice you're struggling. You got like all these A's and you got this D. Where you can either just kind of tell them like, well, don't worry about it. Look how great you did, which would be an indulgent response and not as helpful. Or you can say, these A's are really great, so proud of you. Like all the effort you put into this, and then, and this D at the same time, we know that's not going to really get you where you want to go. How can we support you?
Yeah.
And you don't always get the best response, especially from your teenager. If you have that, they're like, I don't want your support. But
Well,
still, they're
sometimes the proper role for that isn't the parent, right? Sometimes the proper role for that is the teacher.
100.
Like, that as a kid becomes a teenager, like, the people who really like these non-parent adults become of seminal importance for them. There's a researcher in the Netherlands, Eddie Bermelman, who has this beautiful kind of three-part recipe for raising young people with high self-esteem, secure high self-esteem. Eddie is interested in praise and overpraise in parents. He's got papers on things like "My child is God's gift to humanity." And he's also interested in narcissism. So his recipe is this: first, you have unconditional regard. I love you no matter what. We're not, regard is not on the table. It's not conditional here. And the second is honest feedback, just like what you said. Like, here's where you are, direct, honest feedback. And the third is a growth mindset. Like, I believe you can get better, and at whatever it is that you're not yet there at. And that's his recipe. I just think it's a brilliant kind of summary.
Yeah. And I think what you're also speaking to here is, wow, how important are the impact we can make with other people, and how, whether it's a young person or it's in our relationship or it's just like a person who maybe looks up to us in some way, in the words and how we relate and speak to them, what an impact
Yeah.
that can make on the trajectory of their, not to put this whole grandiose thing like, well, like, what impact I can have on, but really these small things can have a big impact on
I mean,
people's
I think
lives.
it's really helpful to think about that from both sides of that equation. Like, I showed you the book here that meant so much to me, and I think it's helpful and healthy to think about when you were a young person, when you were maybe very young, when you were an adolescent, when you were a young adult. Like, who were the people? What were the things who helped you envision the kind of person that you could become? And what did they do, and how did they do that? And then how do you pay that forward to the next generation? Like, we're all part of that life cycle. We're all part of that cycle of becoming and then supporting another generation in its becoming. And it's not like, to play that role as you get older in life and you become more senior, it isn't grandiose. It's not inappropriate. It's just like what a human being should do for another human being.
I'll add another flavor to that. So for that group of people who are kind of semi-retirement, retirement, or kind of like getting into that stage of life, and what's lost there typically, or what the struggle is in identity around contribution. Like, I used to work so much, or look what I did over here. Or I had a family, I was a father, mother, whoever. But now, what's my contribution really? But what you're opening a whole space for here is like, there's a powerful contribution you can make. And to
Yeah.
feel into that sense of contribution really brings up
Yeah.
a great sense of psychological well-being.
It's really well put. I mean, as I said, Eleanor Maccabee was retired at the point at which she taught that class, and she did that for me then. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Powerful. What about this sense of, so let's kind of like tick down to just the next one for a moment. This sense of, do I belong? I know we touched on a couple things here, but I think this is especially especially in our field of social media right now, or the kids growing up in this time, where everyone's trying to find like, where do I belong really? Where does this come up, and what's the relationship around your work with that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my work so my interest in psychology began really with a direct interest in inequality in education. I grew up as a white middle class kid, heterosexual, stable family, and it like the idea of the American dream that anybody from anywhere can develop and achieve their goals and improve their lives. That was a really compelling, powerful ideal for me. And as I became an adolescent and learned about the persistence of inequality in America, it was very discouraging. It was very sobering to think that young people who were in my generation, like 15-year-olds just like me, but maybe in a different part of the country, living in a different kind of community, wouldn't have the same opportunities as me was very upsetting.
Right. Yeah.
And it was upsetting too because I grew up in the 90s, and this was Bill Clinton saying you had a Democratic president who says the era of big government is over. It was, what was the hope? Like, what was the possibility of? There's no kind of government white horse going to ride in and save the situation. And so then I read about the early work on what's called stereotype threat in psychology by my colleague now, Claude Steele. And what Steele did beginning in the 90s was just look at Black and white students taking a short standardized test in the laboratory under two different conditions. In one case, he said this is a standardized test. It's going to evaluate your abilities and weaknesses and intellectual reasoning ability. And in that case, he found that Black students consistently did worse than white students, even with the same amount of time, even with the same incoming preparation as measured by something like SAT scores. They did far worse. And then in the second condition, he said, this is just a complex verbal puzzle task. We're cognitive psychologists. We're trying to understand how people solve puzzles. And suddenly, the Black students did far better. In fact, they did, if anything, a little bit better than the white students. And then he and his colleagues in the 90s, led by Steve Spencer, who's at Ohio State, did similar studies with women in math, showing that if you evoked this kind of evaluative representation in math tests, women did less well on math tests than men. But if you didn't do that, women did much better. And suddenly it seemed like what is like I was just compelled. Like, what is this thing? Like, what is this power? And what is the real world like? And is the real world more like this kind of threat condition that he's producing? Or could the real world be more like this no threat condition where those kinds of psychological issues are off the table and people are free to perform well? And belonging for me really comes like directly out of that. So if you are a first generation college student, or if you are an African American student or another kind of student of color, and you go into a mainstream, predominantly white institution where most people are white and most people, has parents who've gone to college, or if you're a woman going into a very male dominated space where maybe you go into a class of 20 people and you're the only woman there, or maybe there's only one other woman there, then these are environments that evoke the question, not just can I belong here, but can people like me belong here? Are people like me even welcome? And will we be valued or respected? And that kind of doubt that's seeded by the history of exclusion in education, it makes you read the world differently in exactly the same way we've been talking about in other circumstances. So you get a bad grade, your professor says something unkind, you get excluded from an event with your peers, you try to join a club and nobody wants to have you in the club. It's very easy to think maybe this means people like me don't belong here. Like, maybe that's proof of that. Maybe it's proof people like me don't belong here. And if you have that inference, if you start to really entertain that thought, that's a downward spiral. That's me as a 4-year-old in a new form. And that can erode the kind of trajectory of a person's path through school system and ultimately into life. So belonging interventions that we've developed for many, many years now are ways to kind of surface these worries about belonging, ways to say, here's what for example, going to college is like. Lots of people worry about their belonging in this transition. There's lots of reasons. It can be very common. And here's how it can get better with time. And what advice would you give to other students who might be going through this transition to help them in their experience of belonging? And when you create that space like that, and you make it normal to worry about your belonging, to be contending with that as a question, and you start to think using your prefrontal cortex, like, how am I going to deal with this? How should I think about this? How can I contend with this? People can start to build that belonging. They will, we find that they email professors more, they go to office hours more, they study more, they join more study groups, they build more friendships, they're able to develop more mentor relationships. And then those relationships can sustain them, can give them purpose, can give them direction, can support higher grades, better graduation rates, and a better path into adulthood.
One of the things that reminds me of is what's happening in that circumstance is there's this shared recognition. You're naming something. You're naming something that maybe is under the shadow or not being named. And in that, it brings it to the surface. And then you're saying, then we can explore it. We can be curious about it. We
Mm-hmm.
can finally talk about it. And it doesn't become this like gremlin, that's
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the reason it's a gremlin is, like, show me the 18-year-old who wants to talk about how they feel like they don't belong at their college. Like, it doesn't exist, right? That was definitely not me. I mean, that was something that impressed me so much about the woman I spoke with in Berlin, right? Is she was able to be so direct and clear. And I do think that there's a way in which, excuse me, I think that young people today are better at being able to talk about mental health issues. But absolutely, with belonging, I think we need to be intentional about creating the spaces in which it's easy for people to do that. So in my freshman seminar at Stanford, which is called Belonging in a Diverse Society, one of these first assignments is to go out and interview an upperclassman about their experience of belonging at Stanford, to ask them, tell me about a time you felt you really belonged. Tell me about a time you weren't so sure. Tell me how your experience has changed over time. People do that, and then they write that up, and then they start to think about their own experience.
Yeah, and that's great. And one of the things I love about that is you're having that sense of that discussion about belonging having to come from the inside out from somebody who's maybe a little bit more senior,
Yeah.
or even just from the students themselves, and
Yeah.
they're going
So
to
they
have
can
to.
share their process, and you can start to appreciate both the individual aspect of the experience, but also the collective aspect. Like, here's my version of this story. Here's your version of this story. They're similar and they're different. And here's our version of this story.
Yeah, in autumn, the experience of it is that I'm not alone, and
Right.
this is a human thing
Right.
that we're all experiencing, and so
Right.
let's
And you're
talk
not
about it.
alone, and there's nothing wrong with you.
And that then speaks to that final piece of like, am I enough?
Yes. And absolutely, you're enough. Like, once you fully understand, like, this is the situation that you're going through, you're enough.
Yeah. And from that place, then a whole lot is more is possible. We can open our minds to a whole field of possibility when we get to that place.
Yeah, we can spiral up.
Yeah, we could spiral up. Greg, thank you so much. This has been incredible. One of the things I've learned about you in this interview is what a wealth of experience and knowledge you have. And in this particular area, you're able to rattle off stories so easily, whether it's in the research or in your personal life. And that has a gigantic value to us because we're a culture that really connects with stories. So I really appreciate that about you. What's the final message you want to leave listeners with that they can take with them and begin to spiral up for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interventions that's, like, I think is just incredibly important is this work that we've done on lifting the bar. And on the one hand, it looks like this idiosyncratic kind of weird thing where it's about kids who've gone to the juvenile justice system, and, like, what does that have to do with me? On the other hand, I think it kind of nails the fundamentals of this in a way that nothing else can. So what happens here in this particular circumstance is you've got kids who've, middle and high school kids who've gotten in trouble with the law in some form. They've been sent to the local juvenile justice facility, and now they're coming back to school. The problem space is that they're predefined. Like, these kids are like, like, they're the worst of the worst according to, like, our cultural scripts, right? Like, they're mostly kids of color, they're mostly boys, they've all been convicted of a crime. Like, they're in such a box. And what the lifting the bar intervention does is it simply creates space for those young people to be able to say, here's who I am, Here are the values that I have in school. Here are the goals that I want to achieve. And here are the challenges that I face. And to share that, to take that platform and to share that with an adult that they choose in school who could be a partner for them in their growth and success. And then you, as an adult, receive a one-page letter, a piece of paper. And that piece of paper says, this child, like all kids, need strong relationships with adults to succeed in school. This child has chosen you to be that person for them. Please help them in their transition back to school, help them in their relationships with others. There will be good days, there will be bad days. Here's what they would like you to know about them. And we pipe in that content. That's the platform. And then we just say, thank you. Thank you very much for your work. You're in the front lines for all of our kids. You're the most important person for their success. There's no requirements. There's no like reports to be filled out. There's no accountability mechanism. It's just saying from one human being to another, this person would like your support in helping them make the best use of school that they can do. And they've chosen you personally. And we find that when adults are approached like that, educators in school, it's an incredible moment. Like, it's an incredibly moving moment. Many people cry when they receive that letter, and they feel deeply thankful and honored to be chosen by the young person. And it transforms the way that they see the young person. They see their commitment, and then they express commitment to them in return. And they start to forecast opportunities for their growth and plan out the way that they'll support that. If the young person gets in trouble in school, instead of taking a punitive response, they'll try to reflect back to that young person their goals to help them get back on their track. And in our first randomized controlled trial, where we implemented this in a small sample in Oakland, we found that reduced recidivism. Kids were actually 40 percentage points less likely to have to get sent back to the juvenile justice facility through the next school term when this letter got delivered than when it didn't get delivered. And I think that's the kind of ordinary magic. It's playing in a context in which there's real power dynamics, so that it's hard for the adult to hear and it's hard for the young person to speak, to be able to say who they are. Like, this is not like Sal in One Morning in Maine, who can just say to her mother how she feels. These people, the young people, don't have that kind of voice and platform, but it's creating that space for them to be able to say that. And then it's creating space for the adult to hear that. And then the people can come together and they can start to do the hard work of school.
When you were saying that, I was imagining myself receiving a letter like that and being chosen as the adult. And I felt so touched by that. And I felt a genuine motivation to just kind of like what you're saying, what the outcome is for these. And for a second, I was thinking, oh my God, okay, the kicker here is going to be this was actually done for the adults.
Yeah.
Like, so, but especially in the age of
It's
AI.
really an intervention on the adult.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
not
it
on the
is.
kid. Yeah, right. It's because the what is moving the needle here is the delivery of the letter. It's not the kid going through the experience. It's the delivery of the letter, and then that letter is this mind shift for the adult to say, oh, instead of the default kind of, oh, this kid's going to be a problem, he's going to screw up my class, I wonder what crime he got committed, for. The adult is thinking, how can I partner with this person? How can I build a relationship with this person? How can I be the teacher? Like, that's why people go into teaching, is to do that. And the letter opens up them to be able to realize that vision for themselves in working with the kid.
What do you think the underlying, I just have to ask this because it's part, what do you think the underlying need and value, human need and value that gets tapped into when an adult receives a letter like that leads to that genuine desire to just contribute
I
and
mean, we
connect?
are so like sometimes it can be hard to see when you look around the world, but we are so pro-social. Like, there is nothing I don't think more motivational to people than to be able to do good by others. We trip on our own 2 feet all the time. We get in the way of ourselves all the time. We don't always treat each other well. Sometimes we treat each other terribly. But when an opportunity sort of opens up like that to really, play that part, and when that's like your professional role, it's like there's nothing extra that's being asked of a teacher. You're just being asked to be that teacher for this young person, to kind of execute that role. Like there it is. There's like that's what life is about. That's the meaningfulness.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Right. Thank you for that. And that's a beautiful place to bring this to a close. Greg, I want to make sure people know what you're doing and where to find you. And of course, getting Ordinary Magic is, of course, available everywhere. But let us know a little bit about that as we kind of bring this to a close.
Yeah, I mean, I am not on social media, but you can find me on, you Google me, GregoryWalton.com.
That's your own wise intervention in some way. Okay, so wonderful to be with you. I hope we can have more conversations like this in the future. We'll talk soon.
Great, thank you.
Bye for now. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Emotional Longevity Podcast. I hope you found it as inspiring and thought-provoking as I did. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit like down below, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone you know who could benefit from these insights. Your support helps us grow this incredible community and reach more people who need it. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to truly integrate these ideas into your life, I'd love to invite you to join me in a beautiful, supportive community that's doing this transformative work together. It's a space where you'll find guidance, connection, and the tools you need to create lasting emotional health and resilience. Check out the links in the description below to learn more. And before you go, make sure to tune into our next episode. It's one that you won't want to miss. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, emotional health isn't about just feeling good. It's about building the foundation for a longer, healthier, and more joyful life. I'll see you soon.